my personal opinion is being the head of demand gen is a really tough job, right? For all the reasons, and you got to stay on top of what's happening. You got to be a good partner to your sales team. You've got to, be a little math oriented, which, it's been made clear that that's one of my deficits, but I try. So a lot of pressure in kind of being the head of demand gen or being responsible for numbers on the marketing side. So I know one of the things that you talked about was kind of that managing up and managing expectations as something that, you learned along the way and maybe made some mistakes along the way. So let's talk about that. And then maybe we can talk a little bit about, the pressure that you feel now or don't feel now and how that may have changed during your journey.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and by no means have I've learned some things, but I definitely feel like there's a lot more to go. And I can safely and confidently say I'm not, junior in my career. I have enough, war stories under my, in my vest of, demand gen type things. But that being said, I still think there's so much to learn. And even with each year, I actually try to look back on the year and say, okay, what did I take away from this year? Although maybe it wasn't, maybe it wasn't the thing that I had hoped for. At least there's got to be some sort of learning from this all. And for us, because we've been going through this acquisition, it's very honestly a difficult time because there's not like massive innovation that's happening right now. We can't, launch some life-changing experience while we're, transitioning emails and transitioning contract tools and things like that. So, as through this integration, although I haven't, blown out the water from, my demand gen campaigns brought in this amount of revenue. Like that is unfortunately not where we're at these days. What I feel like, and I'm so glad that Cari brought this up, is just how do you still make sure to have a seat at the table and that you're having these conversations so that when the time comes, when you are able to, when my top executive says to me, all right, we need to exhibit, X, Y, and Z in growth. What are you going to do as a demand gen leader to make that happen? Tell me how much money you need and tell me what you're going to do. And so because we're not there right now, what I'm trying to do is kind of this idea of managing up. So I spend a lot of time really asking the questions, having, it's not coffee, right? It's virtual coffee because we're all home, but, making sure that I'm meeting one-on-one with all of the different executive teams, even if I don't have a specific project with them, but understanding what their pain points are and what they're looking to accomplish in order to pass that off to my team, because we don't have a ton of direction. Our job right now is just to keep the lights on. So that makes it hard when you're trying to manage a bunch of creative marketers who want to do really cool campaigns. And I'm like, well, I don't have a lot of money and I don't have a lot of ideas.
The crawl, walk, run mantra only goes so far, right? Because they're ready to bust out.
Yes, totally. So I think that's just like what I've learned. And I think what I'm trying to still learn or trying to figure out is how do I make sure that that when strategic conversations are being had, that demand generation is at the forefront of saying, okay, we're thinking about launching a product. I want to make sure that a new product or whatever, that I want to make sure that demand gen is still considered, as well as that the executives are taking the time when they're doing their evaluation to say, okay, we put in, $1 million. What's the revenue that was associated? We gave marketing $1 million. What did they do with that $1 million? And I'm just making that number up. And that's the piece that I'm still, not sure of because, Cari and Dana, I would love to hear from you in terms of what you're hearing across the board. But my team is still stuck on, the basic funnel metrics from, the early 2000s of like, you bring in a net new lead and then it converts and then it turns to an SQL and then, and so, but that's not, we know how life is now. So how do you kind of keep your executives running with the innovation that is demand generation and all that we've learned over these years?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a tough one, right?
It's a tough one. Yeah.
We're all like,
Yeah, I think it's definitely a challenge that our clients face, right? And especially when we get into talking about tactics, related to account-based marketing and, where you have, it's not as easy to say, demand generation generated this lead, right? Where it's a kind of an all-in approach and you've got the sales team, maybe the success team, everybody's working to engage with, individuals within this account. That's where it becomes very murky, and then ownership of the revenue becomes very murky. And I think that, the clients that we see that are successful doing that are really close with their sales leaders, right? And the sales and marketing teams are marching towards and are comped, based on, the engagement of these, individuals within target accounts. I think also, the example that you showed doesn't really align to the retain and grow strategy that a lot of companies are implementing, and the recollection or the realization that, we really have to reduce churn, for SaaS companies specifically, but we have to keep our clients happy or our customers happy and grow those relationships. That isn't reflected in a lead or, an MQL, right? That's a completely different metric and a way to look at it. So it is a challenge.
And I feel not talked about lately. I mean, I feel like, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, customer marketing was such a buzzword and we were chatting about it. And I don't know if it's COVID or what it is, but over the last few years, I just feel like some of the emphasis on that has gone away. And yet that's everybody's low hanging fruit, right? And requires a marketing strategy of its own. And I think it's I think it's overlooked. I don't know why. It's interesting to me. So,
well, I always talk about how sociologists will look back at this particular couple of years of time, and I think there's going to be a lot of findings of why things happened the way that they did, during the pandemic. But it is true. You don't hear about it. Although I was on a client meeting the other day, and they said 50% of their revenue goal is going to be from customers this year. And it's
wow.
So it's like,
That's
that's a big nut. Yeah, that's a big nut.
Yeah, and we've got a unique, I don't know, so definitely something that I saw, which was wild. So, we own, as part of Demand Gen, we own our physical events. And so, of course, in 2020, March, everything died. And so we had to transition and pivot really quickly to webinars, which thankfully, shout out to On24, man. They are wonderful. And thankfully we had them. So it was a super easy pivot to, webinar based, as well as all the events went virtual. So then suddenly we had this influx of like thousands of leads, because talk about low hanging fruit. It was like anyone could sign up for a virtual event, and everybody was looking for that like emotional connection to somebody. So we had so many attendees at everything that we did. But then it was like filtering out, okay, who were the actual quality leads? So that was kind of a pain point or a hump in this COVID journey that we experienced. And then now what we're seeing is the webinar fatigue, which is nobody wants to get on. No one wants to talk to you virtually. They only want to do it in person. And so like for this year, my strategy is going to be trying to lean into smaller, intimate, in-person experiences that could maybe be outdoors or something like that. Yeah. And, who knows if that'll work or not. But, it's wild the differences in those types of things. But I think what I've leaned on overall and what I keep trying to drive home to my executive team is that it takes, what's the stat? It takes 10 touches before somebody acknowledges.
And that was before the pandemic. I don't know if it's changed at all, but it was like, and changes obviously on titles. Some are harder to get than others and it require more, but.
Yeah. And so that's what I'm trying to use as my, let's try and see, let's actually measure this year and see if on an account, if a top lead actually receives 10 touches and if they convert with us. And that's like, it feels so low minor, but like MQLs mean nothing to my team right now. So like, I'd rather try that versus this. And it's, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's, who knows what's going to come of it, but it's wild to, watch everything evolve through this time while personally everyone's going through their own thing.
Yeah, we're all feeling it, aren't we?
Yeah.
Put on a smile, put on your big girl pants, and you just go for it. But, underneath, it's the duck paddling under the water. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I was talking with someone this week, and they were like, wine tasting virtual. I'm like, we're done. People want to drink wine with their friends and their family. Like, nobody wants to log in. And I mean, like, if someone invited me to after hour or like, anything late in the afternoon, I'd be like, yeah, I'm good. I just...
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. But I think it's important for everyone to keep talking about it because I think it's so easy for us to all think that we're going through this all by ourselves, as well as if anyone thinks it's not affecting our work, like they're kidding themselves. Right? So I think the more that you can like keep acknowledging it and saying like, hey, this is the first time in a long time in our lifetimes that we've all had a global experience happening at the same time together.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think
and I think you're right. The pain is real across everyone. We're all like, I've had 5 conversations this week about what can we do with no live events still, at least for the first few months out of the year. And then, nobody wants to sit in a webinar. Right. And, and I think like Cari and I keep coming back to, it's authentic content. So whatever that looks like for you and how it translates into demand gen, is people are still leaning into anything that feels very authentic and feels supported, which, we're not great at in the B2B world, right? That's what B2C shines at, which I'm sure they're doing a great job on the Fitbit B2C side, and their content and how this, all of it, is real world. So whenever we can feel that connection. And so I think B2B has some learnings from that, for sure, as we go into this year.
Oh, absolutely. And I think like, for instance, even this podcast, like podcasting, I feel like has gotten so hot because everybody wants to take their breaks and they want to listen to something. And I think that's the perfect way to disconnect. So if anyone's listening, they're already on the right route. But but on the B2B side, it's not as, I'm so glad you both are doing this because this is there needs to be more B2B podcast content, I think.
For sure.
Yeah.
I agree. And I think it's going to be more and more, or we hope so. So
Yeah. Well, we'll be happy to do one for you guys, Ari.
There we go. I love it. I know. We've tried a few times. Actually, Fitbit had a podcast, the consumer side, for a hot second, and that went away.
Well, it definitely takes a commitment to keep it going, that's for sure. So, so let's talk about, I have a funny Ari story. Do you mind if I share my funny Ari story? I'm sorry. Anybody that knows me, that knows you, when I start telling the story, they just love it. But I just... it's hard to believe that this was probably 12 years ago. But I remember we had a client meeting scheduled, virtual. I mean, you and I have worked remote in a distributed environment. We were never in the same office, the whole time that we worked together. So we had was it Zoom? Maybe it was WebEx. I don't know what we were using back in those days. GoToWebinar, GoToMeeting. And I was waiting for you to jump on a call, and I was like calling you, sending you email, didn't hear from you. And then like an hour and a half later, you called back and said, "Oh man, I'm sorry, I missed that meeting. I fell asleep."
That's a good oh shit moment.
I swear I loved that. I laughed. I hope you remember that I laughed. And I technically, I think I was your boss at the time. And I was like, Ari, that's hilarious. Next time, maybe say you had a dentist appointment that you forgot about and forgot to let me know or something like that. Because, I could explain that to the client. I don't know if I could explain an accidental nap. But, as these days, at least on our internal calls, I know there's a couple people on our team that are sitting in their bed as they're working. I mean, it's one of the places when you have everybody at home. For me, my office is in an open space, and I'll go to my bedroom and work. when everybody's making noise. And, it's like, oh, if I have to get on my camera, I'll be sitting in bed. But I just love that story, Ari, because it was just, to look at where you are now, and to know that, I knew you back when you were just right out of college, and the fun times that we had back then. And
totally,
I remember your dad. He owned an aquarium store, and then I think he was doing like
hydroponics. Yeah,
and I was
Really?
like, is that pod? Is he growing pod? What's the?
Yep, I know. A wild ride for my family.
I love it.
Oh my
Entrepreneur
gosh, I want to
dad.
meet your dad now.
Yeah.